What's going on, everybody? Welcome into episode 34 of the MudWatch Sports Podcast on this Monday, December 23rd, 2024. I'm your host, Zach Malamud. Before we get started, please subscribe below. Follow all of my social accounts. Let's start things off with the breaking news out of Queens very, very early this morning. If you were awake, you saw that Sean Manaea signed a 3-year, $75 million contract with the New York Mets to come back for another 3 years. Obviously, there's deferrals involved as well for Manaea's deal, $23.25 million. It's going to be deferred, and obviously that'll start in 2035, go to 2044. And really, the Mets are not worrying about that right now. They're worrying about this year, next year, and maybe the year after, and getting a guy that could end up being their ace for the next couple of seasons with how well he pitched down the stretch and how well he pitched overall last season. I mean, you look at the numbers down the stretch, his last 12 regular season starts, he was an absolute monster, a 3.09 ERA, along with holding opposing hitters to just 170 in the batting average column, and 46 hits. That's all there were in 75.2 innings. So when you look at all of that, I mean, Sean Manaea was bound to come back to the New York Mets, and the Mets were bound to get him back. What a performance he had down the stretch. And even into the playoffs, he was a monster. And you're talking about a guy who really made Shohei Ohtani and that Dodger lineup look pretty silly in a couple games. And the couple of postseason starts that he had, just 5 earned runs in 17 innings in the first 3 postseason starts. Of course, he got a bit shelled in that last one against the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium in Game 6. But I mean, throughout the playoffs, he's been a monster. You look at the Milwaukee series in the wild card, then you look at the Phillies series in the NLDS, and Bryce Harper in that lineup really struggled to deal with Manaea's stuff. And then you're mentioning guys like Shohei Ohtani, who really, really struggled against a guy like Sean Manaea in the playoffs and in that NLCS. So he was a monster the last season, and it was bound to happen. But this is a massive, massive day in my mind for the New York Mets. Is now you take this team where you look at the starting pitching just a couple weeks ago and you say, no, this is not good. And they really need to work on this. They bring in Juan Soto and all the noise in the offseason looking to bring back Pete Alonso. If they didn't have starting pitching, it was going to be a long year for the Mets. So they get a guy that will probably be their ace for this season. You're also talking about bringing back Kodai Senga, who is going to be a second guy, most likely, if he could stay healthy behind Manaea. And then all the additions in this offseason, Clay Holmes making him into a starter. Frankie Montas is going to be another starter as well. They also have the depth of David Peterson, Paul Blackburn, Griffin Canning. Maybe they move one of those guys, but most likely that's what they're sticking with. And that's 7 starting pitchers that you could go with any which way. And I think Canning, as well as Montas and even Holmes, are 3 guys that you probably are going to have to work with. And that's more of a work in progress. Holmes, of course, not a starter since 2018, before he was with the Yankees. Then you look at Montas, who had a okay year, but obviously the Mets, their goal is have those pitchers to come in and really ball out for them and really try and get that sub-3 ERA that they're looking for, that they had in Severino and Quintana last season. Montas is one of those guys, and Griffin Canning, a guy who's really struggled recently to keep the ball in the ballpark, and obviously not allowed too many runs. That's just been the story of Griffin Canning on the Los Angeles Angels. And then you're looking at Paul Blackburn as more starting pitching depth. So they got a lot of ways they can go now, and bringing back Manaea is absolutely massive for them. And you look at this team, and it's kind of ready to roll in my mind. I think maybe you say they add one more starting pitcher in this free agency market, but that's pretty much it. I think they're set from there. The big thing now is, you got to bring back Pete Alonso. If you bring back Pete Alonso, what an offseason it is for the Mets. They bring back a ton of guys from that team last year that made it to the NLCS, including their ace in Sean Manaea. They would have their first baseman back in Pete Alonso. Of course, the guys in Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos, all of those guys, Brandon Nimmo near the top of the lineup, and you're ready to roll. And it's just about really putting things together. And I really, you look at it, the last guy, Juan Soto, who can forget about him? You bring him back, you bring him in on a monster contract, and in the end, it's going to be a really, really good offseason if they bring back Pete Alonso. So that's the next step for the Mets, and we'll see what happens if they do that in the next couple of weeks or so. Should be a interesting saga. Obviously, a lot of teams don't really need first baseman too much anymore in this free agent market after a lot of trades, a lot of signings in the last week or so, and it's leaning towards maybe Alonso taking a little bit less money to go back to New York, and maybe that's his only option in the end. So we'll see what happens there, but obviously a long way to go in this free agency market, but a massive, massive day. I said it once, I'll say it again. Sean Manaea coming back to the New York Mets to be their ace for this upcoming season, and maybe the next two after that. But on the other side of New York, it was the Yankees who also made some noise this week as, of course, they had the trades of Cody Bellinger and Devin Williams coming in. They also traded Jose Trevino this last week, their backup catcher behind Austin Wells. He goes to the Cincinnati Reds. They get back Alex Jackson, Fernando Cruz, a starting pitcher. They also bring in, but then you look at the rest of this, and you say, well, maybe they need a first baseman and a third baseman. Well, check one is right there. Paul Goldschmidt signs a 1-year, $12.5 million contract with the New York Yankees to come in and be their first baseman. And you looked at the Yankees and said, maybe Christian Walker, he signs a 3-year, $60 million deal with the Astros. So he's off the board, and the Yankees make a move right away, and they grab Paul Goldschmidt. I know that they look at Paul Goldschmidt, and a lot of people do, and say, well, he's old and he hasn't been at his best. And obviously this is not the MVP Paul Goldschmidt that people are thinking back to in his years with the Arizona Diamondbacks. But you do look at the Yankees now, and they fill in at first base Paul Goldschmidt, a guy who has a bit of pop to him. And yes, it was a bit of a struggle last year. Only batted .245, only had 22 home runs with the St. Louis Cardinals last season. But you're looking at a guy who maybe could be a platoon with Ben Rice at first base. Of course, the Yankees let go of Anthony Rizzo, who's a free agent, and they bring in Goldschmidt probably to be a stopgap and have that platoon between him and Rice. I think when you look at that for the Yankees, that's probably the easiest move they can make. Just $12.5 million, and you get a guy to come in, the experience, the veteran presence in the locker room of Goldschmidt, plus a guy who, like I said, has a little bit of pop and can get things going for the Yankees. Maybe a bounce back after last season. But I think when you look at that, that's a big move for the Yankees to get that first baseman. The final move, you would say, is, all right, well, it's the decision. Do you get a third baseman or do you get a second baseman? And that's the question in the end. A lot of noise about Alex Bregman. That's been really going on in the last week or so for the Yankees, and bringing in a guy that, yes, of course, is a former Houston Astro. Some Yankee fans are pretty much against that throughout. However, there are Yankee fans that are seeing the positives of that and saying, well, you got a Gold Glover at third base, and your biggest thing is defense and getting defense there. You already have a lot of bats, and you added some this offseason. You just need a guy who can add to that, make contact, get some hits, and drive in some runs, and that's really the big thing for the Yankees is contact hitters. Bregman, not so much of a contact hitter, but more than a lot of Yankees have done in the last couple of years, will get on base. So that's a big thing for setting up those big guys, the Aaron Judge of the world, the Giancarlo Stanton, and you also add Cody Bellinger into that now. So that's going to be big for the Yankees, and I think it would be a smart move to bring in Alex Bregman. I don't know how the Yankees are working out that contract, whether they think it's maybe too expensive or not. And obviously they're dealing with Scott Boras, so they're not gonna be paying a cheap price here for Alex Bregman. So we'll see what happens, but that could be the news in the next week or so. And Bregman's still on the market. Other than that, I mean, you would move Jazz Chisholm to second base. If you can't get Bregman, maybe you try and get a second baseman to fill the spot for a year or two. And Jazz Chisholm, who did a really solid job last year at third base. I know the Yankees and Brian Cashman want to move him to second, but if it comes down to the wire and you don't want to pay Alex Bregman, then you got Jazz Chisholm, who could be a solid third base, as he showed down the stretch last season. But they get Paul Goldschmidt, another move for the Yankees, and Yankee fans have to be very excited about this offseason and the response for this Yankees front office after losing out on Soto. They've done a really strong job in filling in all of those positions and making use of that money that they have so much of now, that they were going to spend on Soto, and now they separate it into different areas. So a great offseason so far, and still a little ways to go for the New York Yankees, but they signed Paul Goldschmidt. He's a Yankee now, a 1-year, $12.5 million deal that sends Goldschmidt to the Bronx. Let's shift things to the gridiron, as both New York teams were in action this weekend, and a couple of losses for the New York sides, as the New York Jets, will start off with them. They lost 19-9 to the Los Angeles Rams at MetLife Stadium and outscored 13-0 in the fourth quarter. The Jets were. They led 9-6 at halftime, had the lead, and then the fourth quarter, it kind of just fell apart for the Jets, and Matt Stafford throws it to Tyler Higbee for the touchdown, gave the Rams a 7-point lead, and then a couple of field goals. Josh Carty tied it at 9 just before the Higbee touchdown, then added to it with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. But the story of this Jets season overall is, they've been pretty unlucky in one-score games, but they haven't set themselves up for success there, and some of that has to do with the field goal kicker, and you can't always blame the field goal kicker. It's tough conditions, and really, if your offense figures things out and puts up more than 9 points, then you don't have to worry really about the field goal kicker. The Jets did not put up points when it came to touchdowns. They only had one, and then they missed the extra point. Anders Carlson did. They had the touchdown, though, to Devontae Adams. Aaron Rodgers threw it to him with 23 seconds left in the first quarter, but that was it. I mean, you get one touchdown, and then that's it. You can't really blame the field goal kicker in the end. You need to put up more points, and yes, Carlson missed the extra point, and then he also had that bad miss really late in the game, and to make the game a bit closer and cut the lead to just a touchdown. And then maybe if you get a couple stops, the Jets do on defense, then they have a chance to get the ball back and roll from there. They had 3 timeouts at the time, but 2 minutes to go. Anders Carlson misses wide right, no good, and just the field goal problems continue for the Jets this season. However, this offense just, really not up to par and not up to expectation so far this season. I know Rodgers has thrown the ball a lot more recently, 28 of 42, 256, but just one touchdown. Only got sacked one time in this game, so you're expecting a monster game in the end and more touchdowns. They don't get any rushing touchdowns. Breece Hall, 14 carries, 52 yards, no scores, and none of those guys, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, got in the end zone either. And then you're looking at Garrett Wilson, had 6 receptions, 54 yards, no touchdowns. Devontae Adams, 7 receptions, 68 yards, and a touchdown on 13 targets. So you're expecting this game. Maybe the Jets put up some more points. They get things going. Yeah, you could blame the field goal kicker, but that's not going to bring you back into the game. Of course, 19 points. You need a little bit more than just your field goal kicker if you're going to make up that deficit, and the Jets didn't do that, and they weren't able to do that. All the stuff towards the end of the game, the muff punt in the end that sealed the deal. But, the Jets offense just couldn't finish in the end, and that's, I think, the problem for the Jets, and figuring that out with Aaron Rodgers. This season's over. You also lost Olu Fashanu to a foot injury, and he got carted out of the stadium as well. So that's a massive loss for the Jets, and you hope that he gets back to full health pretty soon. And when you look at the future and even next season you're looking at now, you're hoping Fashanu can recover well for the Jets and be back for next season. So that's a big loss for them. But now you look at the Jets team, and 4-11, you're kind of looking towards a draft pick a little bit as a Jets fan, and you're seeing what the last 2 games of this season have in store, and it's not going to be easy. You're going to Buffalo next week. Yeah, Merry Christmas to Jet fans. And then you finish up the season at home against the Miami Dolphins, who are kind of winning down the stretch and putting up a good stretch here. So that could be a big game for the Dolphins and a meaningful one for them. Could the Jets play spoiler? It would be classic on the last day of the season. But you're kind of looking towards a draft pick now if you're a Jets fan and looking maybe defense or offensive line. I know some people are saying you draft Rodgers' successor. I don't know about that just yet. I think this is just a weak quarterback class, except for maybe the top of it with those top two guys in Sanders and Ward, who are probably going to go 1-2 in the end. And even with that, I think they'd be maybe middle of the pack in terms of like a class like last year, where I think it was loaded with quarterbacks. And I don't think those guys would be high on the list compared to those others who we saw got drafted last year. But I think when you look at the Jets overall, it's time to look for a draft pick, and we'll see what happens. But the last two games of the season, at Buffalo, home versus Miami, and they fall 19-9 at home to the Los Angeles Rams, who are on an absolute roll right now in the NFC West. On the other side of MetLife, we head down to Atlanta, where the Giants got pummeled. Just put it to you. The Giants got pummeled in this game, 34-7. And you saw John Mara's reaction. If you didn't see it, go check it out. And he's like, can you really believe this football team that I created and had these guys and Joe Shane and Brian Dable put together getting absolutely beat down in Atlanta? He couldn't believe it. So the debut of Michael Penix, and he comes in at quarterback for Atlanta, and it looked pretty solid. He didn't have a fantastic day, but I mean, when you're going up against the Giants, who just can't really do anything on offense or defense, it's going to be pretty easy for you to just have a solid enough day. 18 of 27, 202, and a pick. No touchdowns for him. Bijan Robinson, 22 carries, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the afternoon. And I think when you look at the Giants offense, you're saying, all right, well, Drew Lock, 22 of 39, 210, a touchdown, 2 interceptions. But the greatest part of the day for the Giants and their fans is that Las Vegas beat Jacksonville in the afternoon, and the Giants now sit at 2-13 with the number 1 pick in the NFL draft next season. So could that hold? We'll see what happens. Giants have 2 more weeks left to hold on to it, and it would be pretty classic in the last 2 games. They're home versus the Colts next week, and the Colts still fighting and trying to find something in that playoff picture. 7-8 they sit at in the AFC playoff picture. So they have a lot to fight for. And then the last game of the season down in Philly to take on Saquon Barkley and the Philadelphia Eagles, which we could see probably Saquon Barkley and the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, if he's healthy, end up playing. They are at 12-3, and that loss yesterday to Washington may be a cue for Week 18 to be those guys in the lineup and try and win that game. The Eagles do in terms of seeding in the NFC. Could be a big one for them with teams like the Vikings as well as the Packers all hanging around there, and we'll see what happens there. So that should be interesting, and obviously that last game of the season will be interesting to see how the Eagles handle it based on the results in this next week and the week after that. So we'll see what happens. But as for the Giants, number 1 pick, and we'll talk to Josh Mallett on Wednesday, see how he's feeling. Could lean to maybe Shedeur Sanders getting drafted over Cam Ward, who he wants them to pick the Giants. But we'll see in the end. Obviously, Shedeur was playing catch with Malik Neighbors last week. That may be a cue that the Giants could look towards Shedeur Sanders. I don't know how many Giants fans would be too happy about that. So we'll see what happens there. But obviously the Giants get pummeled on their home field, and another bad week for Joe Shane and Brian Dable as the Giants sit at 2-13 at the basement of the NFL. Quick preview on the hardwood. New York Knicks in action tonight, taking on the Toronto Raptors. Knicks come in as 14.5-point favorites. They're 18-10 on the season, and Toronto is 7-22. I think when you look at this game, the 14.5-point spread kind of tells the story here. Total sitting at 226.5. Couple injuries for Toronto as RJ Barrett, game time decision. Jakob Poeltl, game time decision. Bruce Brown, game time decision. Emmanuel Quickly out for this one. So because of that, I think the Knicks should handle this, but you never know with the New York Knicks. And yes, they've won 3 straight, but you're looking at their last game against New Orleans, and it was a bit of a struggle to beat the Pelicans down in New Orleans. And obviously the fourth quarter was the difference in holding the Pelicans to just 18 points. So credit to the Knicks defense there, but they figured things out. They were losing at halftime by 4, and they bounced back in the second half. Brunson had a season-high 39 points in that one. It's just not easy for the Knicks to beat bad teams. They never make it easy, and it's a little bit hard being a Knicks fan when you're having games like that, but I think this one should be pretty straightforward for them, especially with all the injuries to Toronto tonight. I think the Knicks should handle this one. They also played Toronto last week, or a couple weeks ago, excuse me. They won 113-108 in Toronto on December 9th. So you're looking at this team, the Knicks, and saying, well, they got all their guys, and a lot of guys healthy, and Towns and Brunson are all playing. Bridges and Obi are playing, and then you get Josh Hart back for this one. I think the Knicks should blow out the Raptors here at MSG, but you never know. You got to be worried a little bit, and you got to be a little bit hesitant as a Knicks fan when they take on those bad teams. So we'll see what happens. Knicks 14.5-point favorites heading into this game at MSG, taking on the Toronto Raptors, 7:30 tonight. Tune into that one later. But let's finish things off today with a Monday Night Football preview. It's the 5-9 New Orleans Saints taking on the 10-4 Green Bay Packers, 8:15 tonight. And talk about an injury-riddled game. The Packers come in as monster 14.5-point favorites, total sitting at 43.5. And you look at these injuries for the New Orleans Saints that really tell the story. Derek Carr out for this one. Alvin Kamara out for this one. Marquise Valdes-Scantling questionable. Chris Olave is on IR. So all of these guys are out for this one, and New Orleans is going to have a long, long day, it seems like, at Lambeau, and they're going to have some new guys starting, and obviously there's a lot to talk about from this game. Really not a lot to talk about when you look at the Green Bay Packers. They should handle business here. 14.5-point favorites. How could I pick the Saints in this one? I think the Packers have proven that they, in those type of games that they know they need to win, they'll handle it pretty smoothly. It's just those tougher games when they go up against the Vikings as well as the Lions. It's been a bit tougher for them, but I think when you look at this game overall, it should be the Packers handling business. 14.5, it's there for a reason. And obviously the NFL probably not too happy that how this game ended up with the Saints, all those injuries and sitting at 5-9. And you're going to get most likely a big blowout here at Lambeau Field. So I'm going to pick the Packers. The total, I'll pick the under. I'll say the Packers defense controls this New Orleans offense, and really this New Orleans offense that is basically nothing now without Carr and Kamara. So we'll see what happens there, and maybe do the Saints under the radar, pull a bit of a shocker here and cover the spread. Could happen. I just don't see it this time around. I think the Packers will handle business at Lambeau and really take it to this New Orleans Saints team that's full of injuries right now. So Packers against the Saints, 10-4 Packers and 5-9 Saints. The Packers 14.5-point favorites on Monday Night Football, 8:15 tonight. Tune into that one later at 8:15. But that'll do it for episode 34 of the MudWatch Sports Podcast. Please subscribe below. I've been Zach Malama. Thanks for watching, and talk to you all on Wednesday.